play by most of them anyway. That's right. Well, it's good to see you all.
Oh, you don't need a worship. But without it, I can't.
Oh, well, then make sure she has it. Good morning.
I made it. I'm doing well.
She got here for 8:30 service.
And I told Leon I was going to Sunday school. He's like, good for you. So we're both like high five on.
Yeah. And then Bo had surgery, so I've been like,
Is he doing good?
yeah, but he like comes running down the stairs. You're not supposed to be on the stairs.
Why don't you?
I have a fan blocking, but he got around
He
it.
got around it. Okay.
And then I'm chasing him around.
Oh my gosh. Who are you? No, no. This is like,
Your microphone might not work. Good morning.
this is my sister, not my brother. Jay is the only one to church. He's the
That guy
historian. We gotta go. I got the power. Tim. Michael Paul, George Ringo. And here comes Anyway, it's you guys now. I'm just your helper. It's okay for here, I know. If you need to put your
Oh, I'll just put my stuff up here so it'll be behind us anyway. How do you do it?
Thank you, Ben. Okay, thank you.
Stacy had some like 1950s space age looking chairs. Not your chairs.
And I had to go, you know, they, every time we use the goodness, I had to go over.
As long as you know who they are.
I didn't know where they were, but Terry knows where they are.
Okay. Well, that's all you need.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Hello. You never know how these microphones are going to pick me up. Welcome to our pop-up. We are pleased to have Michael Paul here, and he is our new Director of Adult Christian Education and College Ministry. So that's a new addition to your title, College Ministry, but very fitting. So what we're going to do is I've got some questions I'm going to ask Michael Paul. I would encourage you, if you have not done so, to check the webpage and read over his credentials. He's got an incredible list of credentials, academic credentials, for this role, and we are very, very excited to have him here. Lots of ideas brewing in his head, I hope, and we're going to learn about a lot of those today. So the goal of this session is not just to get to know Michael Paul, but also to get an idea of what's coming down the pike with adult Christian education and college ministry, both very integral to the mission and work of Memorial Presbyterian. So without any further ado, I'm going to hop right to it, but I got to put my glasses on. So of course, the first question is going to be, what interested you in the position of Director of Adult Education and College Ministry?
Well, first I want to say thank you for being here. I don't think that I'm that interesting, but what I hope to talk about and reflect on together is the importance of discipleship in Christian community and how we participate in that together. So I'll share a little bit about what I was so excited about in adult education when I came to Memorial. So my family and I just moved to St. Augustine June 1st of this year. My full-time job is at Flagler College, where I run a couple grant projects there related to my own academic background and things like that. But when my family and I came to Memorial, and we came because we knew a lot of great folks here, and we were excited to be here, bring our kids here. We have 4 little ones. What I noticed is that there seemed to be a thriving education program in that there were a lot of offerings. So there's a lot of Sunday school opportunities. These pop-ups are really exciting. The ideas and the imagination that the church had around educational ministry really excited me. And so that's what drew me to this particular position. And, as I talked to Pastor Hunter about it and the other folks on staff, I just became more excited about the possibilities and, the ways that we can dream together, experiment together. I often say that I like to tinker. That's in my background in my academic work. So I like to find little areas that we can work together to strengthen for, bettering discipleship across the life of the church. And so that's a little bit about why I'm here and why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Great. Why is adult Christian education important to the life and work of Memorial Presbyterian? And it's a two-parter. What are some ways that we can reach out to members of the congregation and encourage them to participate more in these programs?
So let me take I might not remember both of them at the same time. So the first one is why it's important at Memorial. So I think the broader question is, what's the purpose of Christian education in general? And then we can talk more specifically about Memorial Presbyterian. The term Christian education, when we hear that, oftentimes we think that Christian is just a modifier to the word education, right? So Christian education is just a way of doing education Christianly, right? Or something like that. I don't think that that's the case. I think that the Christian part of Christian education transforms the very nature of what education's all about. So Christian education is the only form of education where the subject matter is the teacher, right? The subject matter, the curriculum, or the content of the education is Jesus Christ, is the teacher, right? There's no other education that's that way, right? And so Christian is not just a modifier to education, but the purpose of Christian education is really transformation. It's to learn the teacher, to learn the person and the work of Jesus Christ. And so in any congregation, whether that's Memorial or any other congregation, right, is to learn Jesus Christ in community, what it means to walk together in the way of Jesus Christ. So Memorial is well positioned for that as such an important congregation historically in the life of St. Augustine, that folks look to Memorial as a place where they can witness that. And so I think that that is the strength of Memorial and the opportunity of Memorial to bear witness to and reflect what it means to learn Jesus Christ in community, right? What it means to understand that the teacher himself is the very subject matter and content of what we do in educational ministry. So that answered the first part of your question. Can you remind me what the second part
So the
is?
second part is basically how do we encourage more of our members to get involved in that aspect of the life and work here?
Well, I think that most of us, right, recognize the importance of discipleship, right? That Jesus calls us not just to believe cognitively that he was a, important person, right? Or to believe that, there's this reality that is God, right? And that is this, that there is a spiritual reality. That's not what Jesus calls us to. Jesus calls us to follow him, right? And be a disciple, which assumes a kind of action, right? We're doing something. So to participate in that, to participate in being a disciple, means to participate in the life of the Christian community in learning the person and work of Jesus Christ. So I think, in all my conversations with folks at Memorial, I feel like we recognize that. We recognize what it means to be a disciple. And so I don't think it's a matter of convincing folks to participate in those discipleship opportunities, as much as it is to remind and continue recognizing the importance of ongoing formation, right? That we wake up again and again in need of that reminding of who am I called to be? I'm called to be a disciple. And it's not an easy calling, right? When Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow me, it's not at first, not very attractive calling, right? Like it's not too exciting when you first hear it, and then you realize, oh, that's what he's calling us to. And to get back to the purpose of adult education, if we all think together, what happens in education? There's always struggle. There's always conflict, or else there's no progress. You're not learning anything, right? I think you can all think of a time, either in grade school or high school or college, right, when you're struggling over a particular problem or a challenge, right? Trying to figure it out, confronted with something that's challenging. And then there's always that eureka moment when you find the solution to the problem. Now remember, Christian education isn't just a one-to-one translation of any other educational program, but it is similar in that there is conflict in transformation. We're constantly confronted with that call of Jesus Christ to pick up our cross and follow him. And so I think the way that we can continue participating together in adult education, right, in the ministry of bearing witness to Jesus Christ in our call to discipleship, is just being reminded of that, of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus.
So one of the things, or several topics that we've talked about just in our conversations has been neurodiversity, intergenerational connections, and also we have members who, some of them have never been inside an organized church prior to joining Memorial. So how do you foster those kind of members of the congregation and kind of bring that sense of fellowship in?
I think sometimes when I give this answer, sometimes it feels like a little bit of a cop-out, but if we reflect on it together, I don't think that's what it is. But I want to always start with listening to one another. It sounds easy, right? It sounds like, oh, we'll listen and dialogue and it's all going to work itself out. I don't think it's that easy, right? Especially in our day and age, right? It's become harder and harder to listen deeply to one another, to slow down, to pay attention, and to listen to one another. But I think to continue fostering that diversity, right, whether we're talking about the different ways that people think and learn and move in the world, or the differences in age demographics, right, in intergenerational ministry, whatever kind of diversity we're talking about, to continue fostering that environment, it involves listening deeply to one another, right? How do you best learn Jesus Christ? How do you best foster your spiritual formation? How can I support you in doing that? And you can ask me the same kinds of questions, right? And then we deeply listen to one another, learn from one another, and practice those spiritual disciplines together. And that's how we can continue fostering that kind of environment where we can deepen our faith and also build that community, right? So there's this vertical and horizontal dimension to that, right? In doing that in community, we're more deeply connecting our lives and holistic lives to God in a vertical kind of direction, and then deepening our relationship together in community in a more horizontal direction, if that makes sense.
So many churches today are seeing declines in attendance and membership, and that's largely what's going on with organized denominational churches and congregations. From your perspective, how does adult education play a role in addressing and maybe correcting that trend?
Yeah, so a couple things. The statistics of church attendance across the board, it's pretty depressing, right? We all know that. We all can agree on that. It's even more the case with young people, right? College age, young adults, just not attending organized religion, like Sunday services and things like that. What adult education, and I'll say, educational ministry more broadly, right, teaches us how to bear witness to the good news of Jesus Christ, right, more faithfully, right? So what's the ultimate aim or purpose of educational ministry? And this is, again, how I want to sort of flip our understandings of Christian education a little bit. What's the ultimate aim or purpose of Christian education? I'm going to make a theological claim. You don't have to agree with me. Not cognitively better understanding the tenets of doctrine. That's my claim. The purpose of Christian education is not to better understand the historical happenings, realities of Christianity throughout history, right? It's not even, I don't think, biblical literacy. Now, those things are all very important, so don't hear me say that they're not important. Those are all very important. But the ultimate aim of Christian education, why we do what we do in community with one another, why we're called to be disciples, is to bear witness to Jesus Christ in the world, right? So one way of saying this is that we're gathered together to be sent out, right? We're gathered to be sent. So this, right here, what we're doing, is not the end. It's not the ultimate purpose. This is important. But the purpose of this is for us to bear witness to Jesus in the world, to be sent by God to participate in God's mission in the world. So to answer the question, I think, in a more precise way, is the purpose of Christian education in response to the declining numbers and the depressing statistics in our current in the current state of things, is to respond faithfully to the call to be a disciple and be sent, right? So that we are equipped to bear witness, right? So that the saints are equipped more faithfully for the ministry that they're called to. And that's how I think educational ministry ties into or responds to, faithfully can respond to the decline in church attendance and interest in organized religion. I do want to say, too, statistically, right? You can do some research on this. The most helpful research that I've seen comes from the Springtide Institute. If you Google that, you'll find a lot of interesting reports. People aren't less interested in spirituality today. So it's not that folks aren't interested in practicing some kind of spiritual, spirituality or participating in some kind of religious life. But it's not happening in the four walls of the congregation like it did 50, 60, 70 years ago, right? So that's the difference. But it would be a misconception for us to say that no one's interested in religion anymore. I don't think that's true. Statistically, that doesn't hold up. But it is true that they're less interested in participating in what we traditionally call church, right? And so there's an opportunity there. One way to look at it would be, well, that's just really depressing. No one wants to participate. No one cares about God anymore, obviously. I don't know if that's true, first of all. And then secondly, an opportunity there would be, how can we bear witness to Jesus Christ in the world by participating in what God's already doing in the lives of those who are spiritually seeking, right? I hope that answers the question.
It does, but I'm going to follow up with a little question. So what does that look like?
I think it can look like many things, but it's always going to be contextual, right? So what it looks like for Memorial in St. Augustine in this very, specific area in this context can look very different than what it looks like in, downtown Jacksonville or in Central Florida and Orlando or whatever, right? But I think what it looks like, especially if we're talking about, young adults who, traditionally, or more recently, are just not interested in participating in religious community in that traditional kind of way. I think what it looks like is taking a prayerful posture to listen to those folks, recognize, right? Use our discernment, our prayerful posture to recognize the way that God might already be at work in other people's lives, and to try and participate in that. So practically speaking, if we're going to get really pragmatic about it, it could be finding service opportunities, right? Where people are doing something with their spiritual convictions, right? They might not articulate that in the same way that we do, but they're living in a way that is true to who they are in their, in their deepest questions that they have, right? People are still asking deep questions. And if that's how so what is theology? It's God talk. It's talking about God, right? It's literally the definition of the term. So then the question is, are people talking about God? Are people doing theology in the world? And if we're saying they're, asking the deep questions, that they're wondering about the deepest, most significant questions of what's the meaning of life? How do I participate in helping the world, right? In caring for my neighbor. If they're asking those kinds of questions, in a way, they're doing theology, right? They're theologizing. So how can we find ways to participate in that theologizing? It might look like joining service projects and saying, hey, we're Memorial Presbyterian Church, and we're just here to participate because we see God moving in your life, right? We see God in the way that you're serving your community. And so we want to jump in and participate in that. We see God in the small groups that might be meeting on the Flagler campus, and the ways that they're asking deep questions, whether or not it's explicitly about, Christian faith, or whether or not it's explicitly about Christian history, or whether or not they're even using the same kind of terms that we are, right? It might look like jumping in Christian history, or whether or not they're even using the same kind of terms that we are, right? It might look like jumping in and, hey, and you might have something to teach us, and maybe we have something to teach you, right? And those are some, I think, pragmatic ways that we can think about doing that.
That's a very good point. I think a lot of people, we tend to think, well, I go to church and I'm going into an organization where, I'm meeting other people. I know more than they do, but it's all about listening and connecting. We have a very, very robust outreach program here. I mean, it's amazing when you look at all the community service that we do here at Memorial. So that ties in very nicely. I think that's another opportunity that we have here at Memorial, is we have a lot of avenues for service. And just if you are introducing yourself to someone and say, I'm from Memorial Presbyterian Church, or I go to Memorial, that's all you have to do. At least you're acknowledging them and saying, this is my background, and if they want to ask questions, they can ask questions. One of the things about the Presbyterian Church as a whole is that the majority of our members are, let's say, over 55. How do we address or connect, especially at Memorial, how do we connect with that large segment in such a way that, most people think of going to Sunday school and having a teacher lead the class and have a lesson. Most students, and I've taught at UNF, so I can tell you this for sure, you tell a student they're taking a history class, and you can see the eye roll, and they're like, oh, I've kind of memorized a bunch of dates. And one of my favorite things I like to do the first day of class is say, I don't do dates. And you can just hear the collective sigh from the students, like, thank God. So how do we take Christian education and the programs that we're offering and spin it a little bit to where it's more non-traditional, but still delivering the traditional outcomes that we see or want to see?
Well, I think in some ways we already do that well. Whether or not we're, currently like seeing the fruit of it, right? But the infrastructure's there is what I want to say, right? I mean, think of our feast program on Wednesdays, right? An amazing opportunity for intergenerational ministry, and not just, ministry in a traditional sense. That's not what I want us to think about, but breaking bread together, sharing a meal together, right? We already do, we foster that intergenerational ministry opportunity by inviting college students from across the street to come and have a free meal. Say, hey, if you're under 23, you get a free meal, right? That's a way to say, wow, it's a place not only that could be spiritually nourishing, but I can actually get a meal out of that as a struggling college student, right? It's a way to foster that intergenerational ministry. And then I think a deeper question is, asking, what are people looking for today, right? What are they looking for today? And the depth of those kinds of, questions around history and the Bible and all of that, that's wonderful, and that will always be a grounding point of a place like Memorial Press, right? I think that'll always be the case. But even more so, what people are looking for is a place to belong, right? And we already practice a lot of that with our emphasis on hospitality, right? And we already practice that in inviting folks to share a meal together. This past Wednesday, we fed 109 folks, right? How can we double that? right? Can we invite folks to share in that breaking bread, whether or not they stay, and come to a Sunday service? Just to say, this is a place where you belong and I'd like to share a meal with you. And that's how we can, I think, more deeply foster an intergenerational community of believers who are gathered to be sent. Does that get at your question a little bit?
It does, yes. Yeah. Where's Stacy? Do we want to take some questions? Well, first of
Nope,
all...
look at the time. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So anything you want to address that we didn't talk about first? We'll do that first, and then you'll take that.
Well, I think, one thing that I'll say, if I don't like talking about, first of all, just say this is not my comfort zone. I don't really like talking about myself that much, but I've had a great time doing it so far, and I've had an awesome time introducing myself to other folks throughout the last, few weeks as I've gotten to know everyone. But it's not in my comfort zone to just sit up here and talk about myself. But I do want to say one thing about who I am and what I care about, is my background, especially in the last, 5 to 10 years or so, has been thinking deeply about ways that we can foster environments where people who are outside of what we traditionally call, normal ways of thinking and learning and being, right, in the world and in our church space, where they can find opportunities to belong. So in my work, in my academic research, and in my ministry focus, it's been on neurodiversity. So folks who have received, diagnoses of autism or ADHD or emotional and behavioral health challenges. And that's something that I care deeply about, and if you do too, I'd love to talk more with you about it. My academic research, before that, focused on fostering environments of learning for folks who are struggling with depression and experiencing mental health crises. So that's one thing that I'm always thinking about, and not because right, oftentimes in academia, we hyper-focus on a very specialized kind of area because that's what you have to do, because otherwise you can't write a 200 or 300-page dissertation, so you just have to do that. But I think that if we think together, right, whether on our adult education committee, right, or in our conversations in the halls and in Lewis Hall and stuff, if we can think together about how we foster those environments of inviting other folks to belong who traditionally have not been invited into those spaces, it makes our worship space better for everyone, right? In the educational theory world, or in the learning sciences, they talk about it as a universal design for learning. And one way to think about it are those sidewalk cutouts that you see at intersections. If you walk out to an intersection, pretty much any intersection in a decent-sized city, you run into these sidewalk cutouts that lead you through the intersection. That's not always been the case that they had those, right? There was a particular problem that folks who were getting around in a wheelchair couldn't get down and cross the intersection. So what do they have to do? It made sense to create a ramp, right? It made sense to create a cutout in the sidewalk. And that benefits me, right? I mean, it benefits all of us, I think, that you're not tripping over the side. So it's a universal design. It's a way for us to think, how can we focus on those who have been marginalized traditionally in our congregations, not for the purpose of just hyper-focusing on one group, right? Although we're called to, walk alongside and care deeply for those who have traditionally been marginalized. But in doing so, that strengthens, builds up, nourishes the entire community of believers, right? So as we think more deeply about how we can foster environments for more diverse ways of expressing our faith, of worshiping together, of, participating in the corporate life of the congregation, it benefits us all, right? So that's all I want to add.
Okay. One real quick question is, how did you decide to do this? Like, at what point in your life did you sit down and say, this is what I want to do?
This focus that I was just talking about?
Just everything. I mean, like,
Yeah.
because if y'all laugh at this, I'm going to kill you. But when I was a kid, I wanted to be a monorail driver at Disney World.
That was pretty cool, though.
Yeah, because I went to Disney World, I was
Yeah.
like, oh, this is really cool. But I obviously didn't wind up that way. But so at what point did you say, I want to be involved in religion, theology, education, and I have a focus on neurodiversity and intergenerational, all of that stuff. When did that happen?
Well, I'll try and fly through that, but to start sort of from the start, I grew up serving in the local church and knew that I always kind of wanted to do that, not knowing really why, but that was just the way that my family and my the way that I was socialized in growing up, right, through my teenage years and stuff like that. The way that I met my friends, the way that I connected to other people was just participating in the life of the church. So there's that, right? But I didn't really know what that meant or how, what it looked like to be called to ministry until I had some loving college professors who said, it seems like you would do really well at seminary, right? Asking some deeper questions, reflecting on those kinds of things. And then in seminary, I realized that there was a way to connect those really practical questions that I had about the fostering environments for folks who are different in our congregational culture, and then to ask those questions from a theological lens and to say, well, what does that mean given theological anthropology, meaning like who we're called to be, who God's made us to be, right? Or what does that mean in the doctrine of the Trinity, that God, in God's self, is in community and calls us into that, right? So asking those deep theological questions in light of the really pragmatic questions that I had, I found out there's a way to do this, and so I got into practical theology, which is essentially does just that. It asks, well, what's going on in this congregational culture? Why is that the case? What ought to actually be going on, like normatively, because we all have theological convictions, things that we care deeply about and things that we believe about God. And so what do we think ought to be the case? So that's where we make a theological claim, like those who are marginalized should be included in our community. That's what ought to be going on. And then the pragmatic question is, well, what do we do about it? So that's the kind of practical theological method, and that's why I got into that. But with the neurodiversity piece and mental health, I think it's something that touches all of our families in one way or another, right? I guarantee if you sat down and thought about it, you can identify a family member or a close friend who fits in that category as thinking, learning, being different in the world, and then reflecting on, well, what does that mean in light of my vocation, my ministry, my call to be a disciple? And so that is also true of me, that I was able to kind of sit down and reflect on that and reflect on my own experiences of mental health challenges at various points in my story, right? So to put it in a really, bluntly, I had skin in the game, right? And I think that we all do if we admit it, right?
What questions do y'all have? And Stacy's going to do a marathon and run around.
Want me to say who I am?
Go ahead, sure.
I got a frog in my throat. Tom and I are in the outreach committee. Years ago, I guess you could say in the outreach committee, which of course was very robust, as you say, I guess you could say we had a eureka moment. And we accepted the invitation of our denomination to become a Matthew 25 church. And I'm just wondering how you might fit into that here in the church.
Yeah, and could you say just a little bit more about what that means, defining what it means to be called to be a Matthew 25 church? And I'll repeat the question for folks.
They have set up. Tom, let me take you take over.
Hi, I'm Tom. Matthew 25, adopted by our session, has 3 pillars: congregational vitality, eradicating systemic poverty, and racism. They're the 3 pillars. And so I think what Anne's asking, and I also would like to know, how can we more integrate that into our educational program?
That's a fantastic question. I will say really, really briefly that this is something that Stacy and I have talked about too, as you know, she's the chair of the Adult Education Committee, and had a few conversations already, even though I've only been in this role for 3-4 weeks now, is how to better integrate the work of the adult education at Memorial Presbyterian Church with the work of the outreach committee, because this is what I was getting at a few minutes ago when I said that the purpose of being called together in community and to learn with one another and to learn what it means to follow the way of Jesus Christ is to be sent. And so if we're missing the outreach piece, I think we miss it altogether. And then we just become a club, right? So if it's just about the education for education's sake, then that's when it becomes a problem. And so I think there are pragmatic ways to do that, and that's something that we're currently talking about, connecting those dots a little bit better. But I think if we don't, then that's a failure on our part.
I've got a background in Christian education and we retired here. And one of the things that I have noticed over the years that we've been here, or I've been here, is the tendency of segregating by age groups and special interest. There are very few opportunities for intergenerational activities. And if we look at what's here, the age group that's at this meeting is older. We've got a vivacious adult ministry from the ages of 35 to, it was the young adults group, it is now pushing 60, but they're still the young adults group. How do you go from being segregated by age group, and we've really done this has been systematic over the last few years, into being intergenerational? Because if you don't pick a topic that's for your age group, nobody shows up. There's no interest in being intergenerational.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things on that. First of all, intergenerational ministry in a congregation, in a vibrant congregation like Memorial, is necessary, right? Not just to sustain the life of the church, right? Not just to keep the doors open because we need the next generation, like, you know, we need young blood in the pews, right? Not just for that reason, but to be faithful to the call of Jesus, right? So I think I want to say a couple things that might be challenging for us. First, I'll start on a positive note, though. I think we try to do that with programs like Feast. I think that's the aim, right? Is to have environments where everyone can belong and sit together and break bread together, and then to offer educational offerings that pique the interest of a variety of folks, right? And I think that there's more opportunity, though, on Wednesday Night Feast to not segregate by age and to invite more intergenerational participation. It breaks my heart, I'll just be honest and say that, I guess, that I can throw a rock and hit Flagler College and we don't have more folks in here sitting next to you, So that just kind of stinks in my as I reflect on that. And that there's a lot of different reasons for that, statistically, all of that kind of stuff. It's not, it's not like it's all of our faults and, we should be depressed about it or something like that. Statistically, there's reasons that college students aren't coming in the doors of Memorial. But it is sad, right? Like, I wish that they were in these pews with you today. But I do think that that's what Feast and those kinds of programs aim to do. I think that we can have better on-ramps for educational programs for new folks and for younger folks to participate in. I don't know exactly what that could look like, but I'd love to have conversations about it. But one question that I would have is how are our educational programs inviting folks to participate and making the on-ramps clear and say, to say, here's a way that you can enter, low stakes, you're welcome to participate, and you belong here no matter who you are or where you're coming from. And I think that something like that fosters some intergenerational relationships as well. So I agree, I think it's not just a problem at Memorial, so I'll say that, right? This is and it's not just a problem at PCUSA congregations, and it's not just a problem at mainline congregations. It's a problem across the board. And the more non-denominational or evangelical congregations are following the same trend, just about 20 years behind, statistically speaking. If you look at the data, that's the reality of it. So there's a decline across the board. Some denominations are just slower than others in following that trend, but it's a trend across the board, and it's something that we need to think deeply about. But it's something that I want to, again, this isn't a cop-out, but it's contextual, right? So what works here and engaging in intergenerational ministry might not work in another context. And so Christian education, all education, has a zip code. We have to think deeply together about our community. That might involve, we can get together with the adult education committee and do some community mapping. Think about, well, if people aren't here at this longitude and latitude, where are they in this community, right? And then how can we participate in what they're doing? And that's one way that I think we can better foster intergenerational ministry as well. But that's a great question. Thank you for that question.
All righty. Well, y'all, thank you for being here this morning. Our next pop-up is going to be next month, a familiar theme. It's going to be a Flagler fireside chat with myself and Dr. Keyes. So if you have some questions about Flagler that you've always wanted to know, is everybody familiar with Dr. Keyes? Dr. Keyes taught at Flagler. She's a retired professor of history. She did her dissertation on the Hotel Ponce de Leon from a structural historical preservation standpoint. So she'll be coming from that angle. And then y'all know me, so,
And can I just say thank you all for being here? It means so much to me, and I hope that I get a chance to... And I hope that I get a chance to meet everyone individually, so please, if I haven't introduced myself, give me a chance to. Thank you so much.
And Michael Paul, we're very excited to have you here. So thank you so much for taking time to do this, and thank you all again for coming this morning.
Thank you.